All righty. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on what part of the planet you're in right now. My name's Chris Dial, again with the Basketball Embassy, and I'm joined today by a very special, distinguished guest. I'm going to make him shake his head a little bit, but Dave Telep is here from the San Antonio Spurs. And Dave, it's always funny to me they give you guys these titles, director of scouting, player personnel, comma, but we all know around the family that if you're working in and with that front office, in and with player ops personnel, that all of you guys are wearing a million hats. And so I wanted to say, while we're on here with these participants and kind of recording this, obviously a lot of people watch these replays, but I wanted to make sure to share again my sincerest appreciation for you taking the time to do this and share with us a little bit about you, about your experiences, about the Spurs, and I think the coaches will have a ton of takeaways from this. And I also wanted to encourage our participants to utilize that Q&A function, at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to try to get as many of these answered from Dave as we can. We'll kind of push most of the questions to the end, but we'd love some interaction. Dave was gracious enough to be willing to take some questions, so I'll get those to him. And at the end, Dave, I'm going to take 2 minutes and push a little bit of the Spurs Give, the affiliate nonprofit that you guys with the organization, just talk briefly about some of the cool things that they're doing in the community. So but for now, man, I'm going to get the heck out of the way and let you share with us, and enjoy. And thanks again for being here.
Thank Chris, I appreciate it. And thanks for the work that you do with Spurs Give and within the San Antonio community and the global community. And before I get started, there's two things that I want to relate to you. One, to the audience and the people who may be watching domestically from the United States and globally. Thank you. For the past 25 years, you folks have opened your countries, you've opened your arenas, and you've opened your gyms to us. And when I mean us as a member of the San Antonio Spurs, we don't take for granted the access that you've given us, the relationships that you've allowed us to forge. And I'd be remiss if I didn't start by saying thank you for what you've done for us. And we value our partnership with the global community at the highest level. Second, you probably see on your screen there kind of like the title of what we're going to run through today, making good decisions and finding your edge as a scout. And I really have like one goal to get through this, is to share some of my personal experiences and some insights, but not give away the farm so that our Serbian coach doesn't call me and give me a piece of his mind when this whole thing is over. So I'm going to try and share with you as much as possible. Hope you find it beneficial in the end, and happy to take some questions. But you're probably asking yourself, who is this guy? I'm not a former coach. I'm not a former player. Coaching was never my deal. I had a sincere passion for scouting, and I was fortunate enough that along the way to be mentored by some of the people that I consider to be the best, most intelligent, empathetic, and insightful people in the business. And they helped me along with my career. And as the father of two boys, it's important to understand, and I want them to understand, that their ceiling in life is limitless as long as they find what their passion was. And for me, my passion was scouting basketball. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do that. In 2013, I joined the San Antonio Spurs, but for 16 years prior to that, I sat in high school gyms and weekend AAU tournaments all across the country, and I offered my opinions on players and various media outlets. When R.C. Buford offered me the chance to join the San Antonio Spurs, it was time to exit one gym and open up another arena. And I'll be honest with you, I had very little idea what I was doing. I was comfortable as a scout, and I had some things that I thought were important. But the San Antonio Spurs were gracious enough to give me what I would deem a PhD in scouting and basketball, and I couldn't be more thankful to the people who helped me along the way, from R.C. Buford to George Felton, who's the Spurs longtime director of college scouting, Scott Layden, Brian Pauga. My first year in San Antonio, and Sean Marks, they let me in, and they let me really understand and learn the business. And they opened some doors for me. And I would encourage you, if you're watching this and you're ever in a position to do for them what they did for me, give back. And my quest really it was the intersection of luck, passion, hard work, and some determination. You may be sitting there today, and whether you're building a scouting department in the NBA, the Euro League, a FIBA organization, or a high school or an AAU team, along the way, I've found there's just some basic tools that can really help you make good decisions. Scouting is not rocket science, as many people have probably told you over the years, but making good decisions is a real big separator. And organizations internationally in the NBA, they've all added levels of intelligence each year as they go through their scouting pass. And what I'd like to do is just share some ideas with you, so maybe you can help turn some good ideas and some great evaluations into a way where you can potentially gain an advantage versus some of your opponents or some of your peers. And I'll just share some of the things that along the way have helped me in San Antonio. See if I can get this to work here. So the pathway to making good decisions. You see that gentleman to your left there. Derek White is one of our guards, but the gentleman you recognize immediately is at the top of our organization. And he and RC and Brian Wright, our general manager, they've oftentimes given us a clear set of objectives. And as a staff, especially in a scouting department, knowing what you're looking for is a significant part of the battle. I remember sitting in a gym one time with a college coach, and I asked him, he was brand new, he had a 4-year contract, and I said, "What do you need?" And his answer was, "I just need good players." And I imagined myself being his assistant and going out into the community to try and find what he deemed were good players. And I realized that that's just not enough of a directive. And the coach with the 4-year contract wound up only making it for 2 years on his deal. His staff didn't understand what he wanted. So a directive from the top with a clear set of objectives. If you picture yourself I'm not a big hunter, but I'd rather use a rifle with a scope than a shotgun when I'm going out looking for talent. So clear set of objectives from the leaders of your organization. What are the requirements of your system? What is your coach willing to accept? This is an area that you can't assume. It'll be communicated to you often verbally, but often non-verbally as well. The person in leadership in a real strong, healthy organization is going to communicate non-verbally by putting these things into practice. You'll have conversations. You will have a clear understanding of what your organization seeks when it comes time to add free agents or draft picks. So the communication is an important part. We have to bring a certain type of player to pop, knowing that it's going to be a challenge for him to connect and trust the young man if it doesn't fit in the parameters of what he sees. And we're very fortunate that he lays out a clear set of objectives for us. And if it's a free agent, what role are we as an organization looking to fill? And will that player's skill set match up with that? And in many cases, the actual fit can trump the talent of the player. And that's a very healthy thing to have happen. The second thing I wanted to lay out for you is understanding your toolbox. So what is your toolbox? In our case in San Antonio, our toolbox has three things from a scouting perspective. It has scouting, it has intel gathering, and analytics. And when I first came to San Antonio, R.C. Buford, I can remember him saying, look, when the eyes, which are the scouting, the ears, which is the intel, and the numbers, which are the analytics, when they align, you can make a good decision. You can feel empowered to make a good decision. So if those three things are in agreement, you really feel strongly and can have some conviction about the decision. If they're not in alignment, the first thing you have to do is ask yourself, why not? And from an analytics perspective, and it's a huge hot topic in basketball world, and it's a global conversation. How do analytics fit? And analytics fit in the sense that a real healthy way to use them is to use them to drive questions and to promote internal debate amongst your staff. This allows the analytical minds to communicate, the scouting minds to communicate, and it's really a checks and balances system. Maybe eyes, ears, and numbers don't line up because you have some holes in your intel process. Have you made enough telephone calls? Have you connected with the right people? Do you understand the people in the orbit around the players, or the people around the player's orbit enough to understand the player? So we rely on our intel, which are our ears, to help us understand these players that eventually we either turn into free agents, trade targets, or draft prospects. And your eyes are really where this whole thing starts. So you have to ask yourself, what is our level of confidence in the scouting that we've done on this prospect, free agent, or trade target? So just to recap, simple way to look at your toolbox: you've got some scouting, you have intel, you have analytics, and if they are in alignment, there's a solid chance you can make a good decision. Third pathway to making a good decision is getting comfortable with really difficult choices. And the first part of that is really understanding the culture that you're operating within. One of the things about our culture that I really value, and you've heard Pop say this numerous times, he wants people to be able to get over themselves. And if we can start aligning people, whether it's, again, players, draft picks, free agents, or trade targets that get over themselves, we can get into positions where difficult choices can become a little bit easier. But the component of difficult choices has a couple things in it. There is a time commitment when you're making these types of decisions. And you're trying to make an excellent acquisition for your organization. There's a commitment that you need to make to do the extra work, whether it's double checking a source, rewatching your film, or just scratching that curious itch that in the back of your mind you haven't gotten an answer to. I know for me, oftentimes before making a difficult decision, sometimes it's important to get on that extra plane trip, see that person one last time, whether it's a player that you're watching or someone that you need to ask a difficult question to. Get in front of them and make that ask in person. Another aspect of getting comfortable with difficult choices is the idea of acquiring talent versus your organizational values. And this isn't as clear as it sounds. Make no mistake about it. We're in the talent acquisition business. We're trying to win basketball games, and there are no perfect players. So oftentimes you have to weigh the decision of talent versus its impact on the organization. Sometimes the more talented person can really put a strain on your community, on your organization. You have to ask yourself the question, does that talent for this moment in your organization, does it set us up for success? is that talent going to be a drain on a valuable resource in another area of our building that we can use in a different way? Is the value add that we're going to get with this player, are we sacrificing too much of our organizational values? And this is really a challenging thing because, again, talent acquisition, getting good players, those are things that contribute to winning basketball games. And it's often part of a difficult choice. The organizational values versus the talent. What are you willing to accept? And the final thing with getting comfortable with difficult choices is there is going to come some pain with giving something up for the greater good of your team or your organization. You know, there's a story, and I'm not giving away the farm here, but it's common knowledge that one of Greg Popovich's favorite players was George Hill, and it's almost a decade ago now. But Greg Popovich and R.C. Buford had to come to the difficult choice of trading George Hill for the opportunity to make a draft pick, and that draft pick turned out to be Kawhi Leonard. And just hearing these men over the last 7 years of my career in San Antonio talk about that, you understand quickly why it was such a difficult choice, because a guy like George Hill had been raised in the San Antonio culture. He aligned with the values. They loved him as a person. They loved him as a player. And a decision was made where to go forward, a new piece was needed. And those are difficult choices, and they're never something that you get quite comfortable with or even get over. But in this decision-making process, you have to expand your comfort zone a little bit. So just to recap, the pathway to making good decisions: have a clear set of objectives, use the toolbox that you're given, and get comfortable with difficult choices. Wanted to share, get this question a lot. How can I get into scouting? What are some tips for maybe becoming better at my job? How can I do a better job for the person that I work for the organization that I'm in? And you have to remember that this is a ever popular and expanding world of scouting. Offices in the NBA are outgrowing their buildings because whether they're adding staff in different areas, pro scouting, analytics, college scouting, eventually there may be a situation where we need to pay more attention to the high school aspect as well, as younger players start coming into the draft. You're seeing players go overseas from high school. The world of scouting, while the globe is shrinking, the world of scouting is expanding. And I just wanted to share a few things that I think can help you find your edge and maybe sharpen your tools as you go through your journey of adding players to your organization or trying to find free agents if you're an overseas team. And I'll begin with this one. Be curious. A few years ago, a gentleman named Brian Grazier, who is a Hollywood executive, part-time producer. He's a big deal in Hollywood. He works a lot on movies with Ron Howard, and he has amazing access to people. So what he did was once a week, he would search out what turns out to be a really, whether it's a famous Hollywood person, a political mind, a sports figure, and he would do these lunches or meetings in his office, or he would get on a plane, get in his car and go see these people, try and carve out an hour of time and pick their brain. He was really satisfying his need to be curious. And as a scout, to me, curiosity is one of the undervalued aspects of your job. It's not enough to go watch a player and maybe you're seeing him for the first time. Maybe he's a freshman, or if you're overseas, maybe it's an American player that you hadn't heard of. It's not enough to just go watch him, get in your car, get on a train and end the day. If you don't wake up the next morning asking yourself, I've got to learn more about that, I've got to know more about this player, then you haven't really gotten in touch with the curious part of your scouting side. I'll give you just a real quick story. I was watching a young man play a couple of years ago now, and I was actually charting his shots, and it was amazing. He was operating directly on just the left side of the court. So the next morning, I called one of his coaches, and I said, "Look, what happened last night kind of threw me off. Is your offense set up to do this, to just play for him on the left side of the court?" And he goes, "I don't know how to tell you this, but nobody's asked. But here's the truth: we can't put him on that side of the court. He doesn't think that way. He doesn't see that way. His dominant hand will not allow him to exist on there. We've got to keep him in a box on this side of the floor." And it's just that little hint about curiosity where I immediately knew this isn't going to be a guy for us, because the stylistically we're going to ask him to do some different things, and we're going to actually try and use both sides of the floor. But it's that curiosity that led to the next question, and eventually the elimination of a player. So be curious. Second thing I'd offer is exhibit some tenacity. If you're curious and you're tenacious, then you're probably going to get to the place where you need to go watch players. Get there early. There's nothing more refreshing than getting into the gym and watching the layout of the pregame and the game and the postgame happen right in front of your eyes. If you get there early, you're able to see which players arrive first, how they go about their business, what is their approach. The guys who arrive at the tip and leave at the final buzzer, that may work for them. But for me, that never worked. Like I said, I wasn't a former player. I'm not a former coach. For me, being tenacious and having a mindset of, I want to watch this entire situation unfold and see what I can learn from it. The tenacity is always something that I've tried to hang my hat on. The third thing is really the expansion of your network. We're all social beings. And in this business, if you're going to be successful, you have to have interactions with people. They can be brief, they can be extended. In my travels to Europe, it's not like I see those folks all the time, but we connect, whether it's a telephone call, a FaceTime call, a text message, how are you doing? And you're constantly trying to expand your network. And if you can do it in an authentic and genuine way, you can really grow your resources. And your network is something that you can rely on to help you. Whether you're in a situation of a free agent and a team in Pesaro, Italy, had that guy at one time and you just aren't sure, and you've been to the town, you've been to their gym, there's someone there that you can call and talk to. Let your network work for you. Fourth thing I'll share, and this is something that I subscribed to a long time ago, the notion that your DNA doesn't lie. There's kind of this innate code that we all have in us. And I think players have it too. They absolutely can get better. When you take books away from a college student and put him in a situation where he's just focusing on basketball, there are certain things that he can improve upon. But I believe the base of that guy, his DNA, is not going to change dramatically. Whether is he a nighttime go out guy? Is he a party guy? Is he a guy who has typically his habits are not as sharp? You may be able to change that guy 10 to 15%, but you're not, over the course of time, I think you'll find that the DNA and the genetic code in that player, in terms of who he is and how he's going to conduct himself, stays relatively same over time. So if you get a good feeling about what somebody's DNA is, trust your gut and your instincts there. Pop has a saying, he am who he am. And usually Pop is grammatically correct, but he likes to throw he am who he am out there to remind us. And to me, it's a trigger that You know, your DNA doesn't lie. And it's a notion that I subscribed to early in my career, and I continue to rely on to this day. Fifth thing I'd share with you is, especially young scouts, they want to tell you everything. They want to tell you the good, the bad, the ugly. When I first started scouting for the Spurs, the first scouting report that I turned in, one of my mentors, George Felton, sends me an email, and it just said, "Hey, really enjoyed your work, Mark Twain." And that told me that my work on that scouting report was way too long and not needed. I wanted to tell him everything. And a lot of times you need to know everything. But what gets lost in the shuffle sometimes is people harping on the negative. And I would turn that around and say, instead of telling us what he can't do, let's talk about it and let's focus on the positives of what this young man can do. In our league, in the NBA, there's just certain skills that if you have them, you're going to have a shot. If you shoot 48% from the three-point line in college, you've put yourself in a position to where you have a marketable skill in the modern NBA. You've probably found that over time, rebound rates tend to translate as well. Another positive that I find very useful is the late bloomers. Those guys may not have the resume of other guys in their generation or their age group, but late bloomers are a big thing. So don't be afraid to stress the positives. Yes, it's important to know what he can and can't do, but don't overlook the good. And then the final thing I'd like to just share with you is, if you're going to be willing to be right, you have to be willing to be wrong. And to do that, take nothing personally. And this is an area of growth. It is not the easiest thing to do. I can probably think of more times where I was on the wrong side of this. But as I grow and learn and interact with our staff and we bring on new people, we try and encourage a collaboration and a debate. And it's okay to disagree and then commit to the greater good when it's all over. And taking nothing personally is a challenge, but it's something that if you commit to, you can grow in. So just to recap before we open it up for questions with Chris, be curious, be tenacious, rely on your network, try and expand your network. Pop says they am who they am. I grew up learning your DNA doesn't lie. One's an apple, one's an orange, but they're basically both in the same fruit family. Identify the positives and do your very best to take nothing personally, encourage debate amongst your peers and amongst your staff, and try and create for yourself a healthy environment of debate and interaction. And with that, I really say 30 minutes of listening to me is not something that I would recommend typically. So I hope you got something out of it. But more importantly, I'd be happy, Chris, to answer questions that are thrown our way.
Absolutely. Dave, I appreciate that so much, man. It's great stuff. I think, like I said, I didn't make me a fortune teller by any means, but I figured there'd be a lot of takeaways from your session. So I'm sitting here taking notes and rattling a bunch of stuff off. A couple of things I think maybe to get us right in, we'll start having some questions pop up. And as I start to look at these, you mentioned a couple of things. One, it's something that I've been super fortunate enough to hear being around the organization, just as this sort of really attentive fly on the wall, is the be curious part. And you start to hear it echo in the players, you start to hear it echo in staff, all the way down to the last guy in the gym that's just kind of mopping up there. That curiosity for Dave, curious, I think, is one of those words that we're talking to a platform right now that probably represents 40 or 50 languages, English being the second or third or fourth. Could you give maybe just a common denominator example of how how you as a professional would attempt curiosity, you know, in terms of either it being deliberate, either it being something that comes sort of naturally in your space.
Yeah.
But I think maybe giving a contextual example to some of our coaches, they might
Yeah.
they might understand, okay, that's what they mean by curious, because that's not a common word that translates easily, I don't think, to a
Yeah.
lot of these cultures.
Well, one of the guys I didn't mention as a mentor who really opened doors for me, his name is Claudio Crippa. He is a legend in Italian basketball, and he's our director of international basketball scouting. And he, my every trip I've been on Europe hasn't really been with Claudio almost as a tour guide. And before I started working for the Spurs, I thought going overseas was going to Cancun or Costa Rica on a vacation. And I'm proud to say that I'm a lot more worldly now. But I had a great curiosity. And I'll give you the most common American mistake made by scouts when you start learning European basketball. And it is so silly that I'm almost embarrassed to admit it, but I'm sitting there and in the United States, Chris, the best players are typically starting the game and they're on the floor. In Europe, as you know, the best player or the best prospect, he may be the seventh guy to get into the game. And I'm going, Claudio, what is going on? Why are they not playing this guy? How is he not starting? What is going on? And he goes, Dave, this is Europe. And it takes you a couple trips and curiosity to understand the European way, um, how they go about deploying their players, the game strategies. For me, my curiosity and like, hey, what's this guy doing over there? That's the best prospect they have. He's really the only guy I'm here to see. I know he should be playing, but as Americans, we had to really grapple with this idea. And I see a lot of college coaches coming over to FIBA events now, and you can see the wheels turning. They're like, why is this guy not starting? Because that's how we are trained to establish your level and competency as a player. And in Europe and other places in the world, it doesn't work that way. So you have to be curious enough to find out what is going on, why does it happen, what is the thought process behind it. And getting over that hump as a young scout was an important part for me in my journey through Europe. And I don't ask that question anymore. I'm proud to say, and Claudio would probably, I hope he would agree, that I've graduated from the silly American question of why is this guy not starting?
That's a fantastic example, actually, because it's something that I've experienced myself. You know, the flip side to that, though, Dave, is that as we're curious on one half of the planet, I think it forces our European colleagues to be curious as well. You know, and I think when they question some of the things that we do here,
Sure.
it may make us reevaluate a little bit. Why are they so confused about that? Okay, maybe we need to reassess. And so I think this is the way that the global game, you know, the floor kind of raises, and we're able to, you know, just continue to develop this thing. But that's a terrific example. I'm going to jump to a couple of these audience questions here. I
Sure.
stole the first one. We've got a question, Coach Dave, sorry, talking about what is most, I'll say that again too. I'll call you Coach the whole time. What is the most missed, what is most missed in evaluating players? I think generally speaking, you know, what would you say a lot of times we're maybe glazing over that we can't?
Yeah. You know, I think the context of which the player has grown up and the surroundings that have influenced or have not influenced his development. So I think in order to really make what I would say is a holistic evaluation on the player, you have to understand the environment and the context in which he sees the game, how it was taught to him, what were the influences on him growing up. And that allows you to maybe see some of the holes. If you see a particular thing that you realize that he may not do, um, oftentimes there are reasons for that. There are situations that that player may never have found himself in because of the context of his basketball development. So in terms of the most commonly thing missed is a good practice is really to put yourself in his shoes and ask yourself, why do I think this happened this way to this young man, and what is he missing? Or wow, he does this exceptionally well, I wonder how he got there. So try and understand the context.
Another awesome point. It's important too, especially for the people tuning in. This question, Dave, just parlays right into that, and it's talking more about the priorities of importance when you're scouting a player. We're talking about the skill set, attitude, behavior. Do you have a totem pole? Do you have a percentage breakdown of what you think would take priority one over the other in terms of those tangibles and intangibles?
Yeah, it's hard to view it in a percentage breakdown like that, because you really have to take each individual case. Each player is on their own journey. The 24-year-old players may have had completely different journeys at this point in their life, and not every 24-year-old is created equally. For us, the first filter that we would put guys through are our organizational values. And this is not giving away the farm, but like character, being selfless, and your work ethic, those are important things to us. So there's an initial filter, and then if you start putting guys through this filter, and it may be your organizational values, then the things that you feel you may be missing in your organization, eventually you start adding attributes, and you really start funneling down to where you may have just a player or two left. And that's where if you can continue narrowing your focus, you can lead yourself to a good decision.
Completely agree. I'm just going to keep running because I think we're going to have a bunch.
Fire away.
This next one is it's definitely a scout question, but in evaluating versus like a standard read, evaluating feel, for the game.
Yeah.
Especially when you're relying on film right now, you're not able to travel. How do you gauge feel?
Yeah, how do you? It's a good question, and it's not as simple. The answer you want to give is it when you see it, but that's not really going to help anybody out. So, how do you gauge feel? On the defensive side of the ball, it's easy to see a guy who may be a good single defender, a good isolation defender, but you have to really pay attention to what he does as a team. Is he able to communicate? Is he able to talk through concepts? Can he get to the right spot? Can he make decisions quickly? On the offensive side of the ball, what is his aptitude as a passer? Is he taking open shots? Is he passing on open shots? What's the quality of his shots versus the volume of the shots that he takes? Does he see the floor? Is his vision at a point where he can recognize other guys playing off of him? Is that one easy thing for me, and not easy, but we have a lot of guys who dribble the air out of the basketball in the United States of America. And unfortunately, it's leaking over into Europe, because I feel like the YouTube highlight generation is hurting the European side of the ball too. But, it's Scott Layden. He had a really simple thing: can't pass, can't shoot, can't play. And that kind of goes to your feel question a little bit. But I think for me, when you can see a guy who understands how to play off of others and can play without the ball, you can see the feel component really coming in. It can be a challenge, and you can sometimes get fooled, but over the course of time, and you identify someone who you feel has feel, I think it eventually involves being able to communicate with others, being able to play with others, and really seeing the floor.
Good stuff. There was another field question that popped up, so I think we touched on those. This next one, Dave, is from actually this is a friend of mine in running around Italy. You may have seen this guy play a while back, but he's asking. First, he says, "Great info, thank you." He said,
Thank you.
"When you scout, do you do so primarily with the preferences of the head coach, the GM, and the organization in mind, or do you scout just best overall talent coming from your gut, or potentially is it a combo?"
That's a good question. It's really a delicate balance because in the back of your mind, you eventually are going to get to the preferences of the general manager and the preferences of the coach. But at the same time, we're trying to write the chapters of the player so we can see if there's been some advancements, some declines. Is he getting better? Is he staying neutral? Is he improving? And especially when you go to Europe, you have opportunities, maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's twice a year, 4 times a year. You have opportunities to see growth in the players. And you have to, our scouts will take a broad-based approach so that we just don't get locked into, oh, this is something that Pop really likes, we have to push this guy, or this is something that he doesn't do well, this isn't going to work for us, because you're evaluating this player most likely over time and not just in a vacuum in the moment. So I would encourage, to answer that question, you build chapters on the player as you see him and as you do your work on him, and eventually you come to a decision-making point where does he fit. But when you're first watching players, um, it's important to see the bigger picture and then tailor it to your needs later on.
It's interesting, Dave. You kind of contextually keep touching on, I think, what the chapters, the time. There's a true commitment to scouting. I think if you're doing it, properly, if you're doing it efficiently. I know being on a collegiate staff, myself, a lot of times that escapes us. We'll hit one video, we'll hit one gym, we'll see a kid interesting enough probably to warrant, some more research, but there's such a wealth of talent out there that a lot of times we're not committing to those chapters. I think that's interesting too, is when you're doing it well, like the Spurs have done for so long, there's a real commitment to, applying some longevity to that scope, trying to figure out, like you said, a holistic view of this player,
Chris, what happens is especially if you're starting with like a 15-year-old kid, and my experience is every summer going to watch the FIBA events, you know, there's gonna be, you hope that the next summer you come back and you see him with his national team, that maybe there's been an uptick or a decline in athleticism. There's been an uptick in his skill, or maybe he was just physically bigger than the other guys. So I've always subscribed to the notion of chapters, and if you can put a couple chapters together, you have a direction in which that guy is going. And you also, importantly, you have a base and a foundation of where he started that you can compare and contrast. And the guys who pique your interest and there's something different every time you see them, they wind up being the prospects of greater value and more intrigue to your organization over time.
Dave, this is I don't mean to harp on this longer than we need to, because we got another question in the queue, but to me, this is just such an important piece of this session. And I'm glad that it's sort of surfaced organically, because so many of the coaches that are watching this, I know that I've worked with, and they're in charge of not just coaching, but they're also in charge of identification and capturing of talent, in their communities, in their countries. And you mentioned earlier about that late bloomer, about that kid that shows up for that U15 tryout and he can't pull twice consecutively, but you're noticing his hands are huge, and he's, or she's faster than everybody else. And, I've been in situations where working for FIBA Europe, and we'd go for a national team selection in an Eastern European country, and a kid that had 35 rebounds in a semifinal game was left off because the same kid couldn't make a right or left-handed layup. But there's something to say about a motor, that would drive that young man to go ahead and grab 35 rebounds in a game. So I think I just wanted to make it a point. Maybe you could wrap it up a little bit more for these coaches and these administrators that are looking at players at a young age. You're talking about chapters, you're talking about space. I always call it like the hairy leg phenomenon. I'll go into and it's like the 25 guys with the most hair on their legs at 15. That's your national team. That's not always who we want, is it?
No, and you may be able to win the U15 with the guy who, for lack of a better word, he's like the big gorilla out there who's just bigger and stronger than everyone else in the jungle at the time. But the jungle grows. And I remember the first time I saw Steph Curry, he might have been 125 pounds. And believe me, I didn't see Steph Curry and say, that guy's probably going to be the best shooter in the history of the NBA. But what I learned with that is, like, in a proper situation with weights, you can limit the problems of strength and physicality and augment that with skill down the line. And the other story that I'll share with you is the first time I saw Chris Paul was at an AAU event in Orlando, Florida. And here's this little kid, like 5'10" of him, nothing. He's just finished his sophomore year. And after the game, I went up to him and I said, Chris, I saw Wes Forsythe play this year. And he said to me, well, did you come to the JV game? And I said, no, I didn't go to the JV game. He said, well, I was a JV player my sophomore year. So everybody matures at different ages. And if you look at the guy who's on our roster right now, Derek White, he played 3 years of Division II basketball, sat out a year, and when we drafted him, he was on the older end of the spectrum, but his basketball age was a lot younger. He was basically 20 or 21 because his body, he didn't belong in Division I basketball as an 18, 19, or maybe even 20-year-old kid. So what his real age was and what his basketball age were two different things in evaluating a guy like Derek.
That's another awesome just nugget, is that basketball age. That should be a factor for every individual that's dealing with youth, that's dealing with young players. Because if you look at the life cycle of a player, we're looking at mileage, we're looking at experience, we're looking at, you got guys, you got the crazy stories like Tim Duncan that's, didn't start formally playing till, if he was in Europe, he would have been playing 5 years prior to, the time that he actually began. So those life cycles are really interesting. I want to get to this question so I don't leave this off. Let me check how we're doing on time. Yeah, we got about 5 more minutes here. 4 or 5 more minutes. This question, Dave, is coach is referring to when you talked about DNA, DNA not lying. He's asking, do you take a risk with the DNA, like in a negative way, when the player is really good or talented? So I guess in other words, how do you balance, maybe there's some tendencies there, but this dude's a stud, how do you approach those scenarios?
Yeah, I think the first thing I tried to talk about a little bit is your organization capable of dealing with that? Because as the scout, you eventually pass him on to the coach. And in the NBA, that guy is dealing with the coaches, assistant coaches, head coach, strength and conditioning, nutritionist, sports science, player services. And if his DNA is going to drain the resources of your organization, you have to really think twice about adding that guy. if you feel that your organization in that moment of time can one really help him, and maybe there's just a couple little things in his life that a few minor changes and some maturity can help him get on that path, then it's a reasonable risk. But it really comes down to understanding your organization so that you don't put too much organizational strain on the other people in your building by bringing that person in. And again, we're all in the talent acquisition business. So these are part of those difficult choices that you have to make. And in order to make a decision like that, you have to empower yourself with as much information about that player as possible. And you have to listen to the voice of your building and where you are as an organization, to make sure you're doing right by everybody involved, from the player to the people that are going to deal with them.
Great stuff. And maybe last little thing, Dave, talking about the organization behind the scout. Um, how much easier is your job knowing that you could find a wealth of human capital, a wealth of talent in a player in some far off land, and know that you've got guys like Chip England, and you've got the developmental staff, and you've got the mindset of the Spurs organization. Because in my opinion, and of course I'm biased, and I'll preface that every time, but San Antonio Spurs have continued, in the spirit of development, when a lot of teams in the league have sort of negated that as a piece of their institution. So we know that we can bring a player into San Antonio that does a lot of things better than anybody in the world, but still leaves a lot of room for improvement, and know that we've got this staff and this curriculum and this system of pedagogy to where we can actually get that player there. How much easier does that make your job as a scout?
Man, it's awesome to know that Chip England and his group, Chip England, Will Hardy, Mitch Johnson, Darius Sangala, and there's a whole bunch of guys behind the scenes that are helping them to focus on their parts of their job and take things off their plate. But it's really, understanding that you have the force of a development crew like that behind you is comforting. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're delivering to them guys who match our organizational values and are going to be attentive to the instruction that they're trying to give them. And you're 100% right. Those guys they're really, really good at their job. They're dedicated, and they've done some things over time to where, their system, they can feel really confident in it. But we all work together in the identification, the delivery, and then the execution of it. And when you have the collaboration like that, and you have the talking between departments, it really makes it a healthy working environment. And those guys don't get enough credit because, we went 20 some years. This will be our, as it stands right now, we have a lottery pick for the first time when Pop and RC drafted a guy named Tim Duncan. So those gentlemen and the scouting people that came before us, they were able to work in unison with the scouting and the player development to take guys who were drafted in the latter part of the first round and help enable them to be rotation players or starter level players. And that's really been a reason why we've been able to sustain some success over time. And those guys in our player development, man, they're awesome, and they're deserving of the credit that comes their way for sure.
They are, man, and knowing them well enough, they're humble enough to not love this, that you're talking about them the way that you are. But it's nothing short of incredible what they do and what you guys have been able to do as an organization. But Dave, I kept this a little long. That's on me, completely on me.
Oh, you're fine.
I didn't want to let you go. Hey, real quick as we sign off, I do want to mention, this is a free clinic. We put this together. These coaches can access this replay. The clinic ends on May 31st, which is this weekend. And we put a donation option up there to help charitable organizations that work around basketball. And if coaches make that donation, you know, they can access this content beyond May 31st. You know, they've got some time to really soak. I know me, myself, I've missed some of these my own clinic. I've got to go back and watch some of these incredible speakers. So, but the Spurs Give is one of those donation options this week. And I just, you know, while you're on the screen, I wanted to, you know, make sure I mention that organization as an appendage, such a strong and a powerful and significant appendage of the Spurs organization as a whole. They do so many things in the community around here, but also with the farther reaching impact. I mean, you guys host people from all over the world all year, and all the pieces to the organization are involved in that. And so anyway, I wanted to thank you for taking the time, for sharing with us, for being willing to do this in such a crazy set of circumstances. And then I also wanted to make sure that the people knew that that was an option for them to go on and donate to Spurs Give.
Chris, we would encourage them. We would really encourage them to do it, because the heart is in the right place. And this is my first year. This will be my first year actually living in the San Antonio community. I've been cheating, Pop and RC and Brian. They let me live in North Carolina, and this is my first year in San Antonio. And even being there a short time, you understand the power of the community and the responsibility that we have to our community. And anything that you can do to help, we appreciate all of the global partnerships and relationships that we have. And in reality, we should be donating to your organizations as well. But this one time, give back, and please join the Spurs Give Foundation that Chris is talking about, and help us out, because it's crazy times, and there's a lot of people who are not as fortunate, and we can really help with this.
Dave, thanks so much, man. It's a pleasure. And I hope, you know, I hope we can welcome you the right way, formally now to San Antonio 7 years later. Get you
We're
down
excited.
here and acclimated. But man, take care. Best to the family, and thank you again. We'll definitely be in touch.
Chris, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me today.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.